Today we're going to take a look at a part of Manchester that enjoyed an illustrious 140-year history. It's hard to believe today in modern times, when you look at this rather dour modern-day landscape of concrete and steel, that there in fact was the Bellevue Zoological Gardens. I expect there'll be many of you who've got your own memories as to what the old complex was all about, but there'll be many of you who don't remember Bellevue at all. Those of you who don't, Bellevue, if you like, was a modern-day equivalent of being a gigantic theme park, a bit like Alton Towers and Blackpool Pleasure Beach all mixed into one. But Bellevue in its heyday was far more than that. There was a gigantic speedway stadium, a massive zoo, a huge fun fair, boxing, wrestling, brass band contests, pop concerts. There was everything here. You could say it was Manchester's equivalent of being its arts and leisure all under the one roof. You get some idea to the size of the site by having a look at it from our aerial camera. The Bellevue site in total was between 75 and 95 acres in total area, stretched along Kirkmanshire Lane, where of course the Greyhound Stadium was built in the 1920s, and the Greyhound Stadium was of course part of the overall complex then. Redgate Lane of course was where the Longside entrance was, and this joined Hyde Road, and we travel up there for about half a mile where we find of course the Lake Hotel. It was a massive site. It attracted millions of visitors. Well, what we're going to do now is to trace back the early history of Bellevue and see if we can revive some of the things that you may well best remember.
Perhaps the best place to find out about the early days of Bellevue's history is here at Manchester's historic Chetham's Library. A large collection of material was stored there by members of the Jennison family. The history books say it was the Jennison family who ran Bellevue until 1925. But it was John Jennison in particular who took over the area in 1836. Jennison was a man of vision and kept a small animal collection at his strawberry gardens in Adswood, Stockport. This proved popular with the public, and soon it was suggested to him to move his animals to a larger site, to Bellevue in Gorton, Manchester. But what was Bellevue like in its early years? Local historian Robert Nichols takes up the story.
At first, very small scale, with the public gardens extending to no more than a couple of acres. However, Jennison gradually extended the area by buying or leasing adjacent plots of land. So much so that in the early years at Bellevue he nearly outstretched himself. An attempt was made to declare him bankrupt in 1842. He escaped from this predicament by the skin of his teeth. As you trace Bellevue's early history, its growth is apparent. The first guidebook was issued in 1847. Of course, Jennison realised that to keep the public returning to his gardens, attractions and events would have to be laid on. Foot races, swimming competitions, kite flying displays, fireworks spectacles, and even an event where a man was seen to be walking on water with the type of attraction that fell into this category. At the same time, Jennison was quick to realise and exploit the added accessibility to the gardens that came from the continued expansion of the railway system at this period. The station for Bellevue was provided at Longside as early as 1842. The first known excursion train to Bellevue ran in 1847.
Firework displays and brass band contests were to prove very popular, but when did they start?
Well, they both came about as a direct result of a visit John Jennison made with his wife to the 1851 Great Exhibition in London. Whilst there, he witnessed the value of music at such events, and he also saw the colossal firework displays put on at London's Surrey Zoological Gardens. Whilst there, he asked George Danson, the scenic artist at the Surrey Zoological Gardens, to come to Manchester and organise similar displays at Bellevue. From 1852 onwards, the Bellevue firework displays were transformed. A large scenic background called the picture was painted, and men were employed to act out a scene of some historical event, usually a battle. The one for 1852 was called the Bombardment of Algiers, and it was very successful. The musical contests were also designed to bring the crowds to Bellevue. A drum and fife contest was tried in 1852, with the first brass band contest the following year. On the day of the contest, an audience of 16,000 turned up. Jennison had a large family, 7 sons and 2 daughters. Many of these were involved in the running of the gardens, and they kept a tight rein on everything and meticulously recorded the income and expenditure for every day. Here's a good example. It's for Easter Monday, April the 14th, 1879. It shows that they collected £949, 1 shilling and 7 pence, and that the weather was fine with a cold east wind. Bellevue in the Jennison era had quite a high degree of self-sufficiency. They baked their own bread and pies, generated their own gas and electricity, brewed their own beer. They even provided their own bricks to build the 14-foot high wall that surrounded the gardens until very recently. They made many of their own fireworks. John Jennison died in 1869, and the gardens were run by 4 of his sons. Further developments took place, and many of the animal houses that survived until the end of the zoo were built in this period. My own view is that Bellevue reached a level of maturity as an enterprise in the late Victorian era, having established for itself a reputation of regional and national importance. The fortunes of Bellevue began to take a downward slide in the early years of this century, and the First World War and the troubled economic conditions thereafter did not help. By this time, control of the gardens was in the hand of the 3rd generation of the family, not all of whom were committed to running the place, and some wanted to sell up. In the end, these people were in the majority. By 1925, the gardens had been sold to a newly created company called Bellevue Manchester Limited, controlled by Sir William Gentle, Captain Philip Hodge and John Henry Isles. In the same year, the Greyhound Racing Association was formed with the aim of bringing the new American sport of greyhound racing to this country. Sir William Gentleman became chairman of the new association, and the Bellevue Company leased an area of its land at the top end of Kirkman's Hume Lane to the association, where they built a stadium to cater for the new sport. On the 27th of July 1926, the first greyhound race in this country was held at the new stadium.
The choice of the North West to stage the British premiere of the sport was deliberate, as it was hoped that the area's coursing tradition would help this form of entertainment. The stadium was built at a cost of £22,000. In 1928, a new sport was to arrive in this country, that of dirt track racing, better known today as Speedway. In July 1928, the first meeting was held at this stadium under the control of the North Manchester Motorcycle Club, run by E.O. Spence. The Aces were soon to move to a purpose-built stadium, returning here in 1988. It was Australian Johnny Hoskins who brought the sport to Britain in 1928, and ironically, he became the Aces team manager in the 50s. Hoskins was also Bellevue's publicity officer, and his time spent at Bellevue is commemorated by a street name on the current Wimpey housing estate. The newly established company invested heavily in Bellevue after 1925. One of the directors, John Henry Isles, who had been responsible for the amusement park at the 1924 exhibition at Wembley, decided to transfer a number of rides to Bellevue. These included the Scenic Railway, and shortly afterwards, in 1929, a second roller coaster was introduced, called the Bobs. It cost £1 a ride, travelled at a mile a minute, and became world famous. The fortunes of the zoo began to rise when Gerald Isles, John Henry's nephew, was appointed director. Zoologist and writer Clinton Keeling explains the key changes to Bellevue Zoo.
Now, what were the sort of significant animal enclosures that were constructed, you think, around that time?
Some were very impressive, and the only ones of their kind in the country. For example, there was the huge gibbon cage, a very, very large structure which gave these animals ample scope for their very, very notable acrobatic abilities. And just beyond this, there was the Monkey Mountain, a huge pile of artificial rockwork surrounded by water. And this was fronted by a floral clock, which was something of a novelty in those days. It made up the area called the Centenary Gardens. They were constructed during the winter of 1935 to 36, and they were opened officially by the Lord Mayor of Manchester at Easter 1936 to commemorate the place's centenary. They were set out with beautiful flower beds too, and they gave a wonderful impression. They were the first enclosures you saw as you walked in through the main gate, through the turnstile, and turned right, and here were the magnificent Centenary Gardens. But another remarkable enclosure was the Rocky Mountain enclosure. This was in the middle of the gardens, adjacent to the Paddock House. It covered, I should say, about 1/3 of an acre. Some massive artificial rockwork, crags, and even a ravine. There was a large pool fed by a fountain that cascaded down from under the rocks. And it was home to various ungulates or hoofed animals, such as deer, wild sheep, and wild goats. It was the only enclosure of its kind in the country, and was based on the revolutionary methods of the great Carl Hagenbeck, who pioneered such animal keeping techniques at the Hamburg Zoological Garden in Germany.
Well, let's now just throw to Clinton. Let's run a bit of film through, and you can perhaps talk us through the Bellevue Zoo around that time. So we'll just play that on the monitor for us. Now, the shot of the snakes, this is probably before the sort of conventional reptile house, if you like, more of a...
No, that was the open-air reptilium, which was built in 1929. The reptile house was built about the turn of the century. The snakes we can see are the diced water snake from southern Europe, and as the name tells you, they are very aquatic, very much at home in water. The diced water snake. If you look carefully, you can see the markings are rather like the markings on a draft board, if you stretch your imagination somewhat.
So we see this shot quite often, the monkey running about.
Yes, the monkey was Peter. In the background, by the way, is the very impressive monkey house built in 1872.
Because this is the sort of thing the public used to like seeing, isn't it, in monkeys coming out for a ride? Yeah.
This has now been stopped, and it's a great pity. There's no fun now in visiting a zoological garden. Notice, by the way, the very impressive flower beds in the background, which were so much a part of Bellevue. That is the red kangaroo, and the species bred at Bellevue. That's in the kangaroo enclosure.
Yeah.
There is Doreen, the baby giraffe, with her mother, Mary. Doreen was born at Easter 1938, and she lived until the 1950s. That's the Kavirondo crane from West Africa. There's quite a group there in the kangaroo enclosure.
And these shots show what a beautiful place it was, isn't it?
It was indeed. It was a place very well cared for and loved. That was the old deer enclosure, or deer park, which was at the edge of the gardens, at the back of the bear pits. To our right, there was the wall, which was the place's barrier, and there it's occupied by alpacas.
Now here we have another example of particularly the monkeys coming out to entertain the public. So would a monkey sort of enjoy this being a boxing?
It's very good occupational therapy. I know there are some today who'd say that it's degrading for a wild animal to be forced to behave in that way, but it's very good occupational therapy. That's poor old Peter again. And notice he's obviously on very good terms with his keeper.
Looks like people used to come in there for a cup of tea and a sandwich and watch a boxing match, you know. So is that the monkeys actually enjoying that?
That's the interior of the monkey house, yes. Oh, okay. That's where he lived.
That'd Probably the monkey keeper there.
Yes.
Ring with him, yeah. This is in between the rounds then, you know, a drink. What would the monkey be drinking?
Probably milk.
No. Clinton, of all the animals that are at Bellevue, the Tygon is often talked about because a beautiful creature, and
Sure,
a rare creature. Any thoughts about that?
Yes, Maud, with her brother Clu, which by the way is Siamese for tiger, were born the result of a mating between a Manchurian tiger and an African lioness at the Dresden Zoological Garden in Germany in 1932. And they came to Bellevue, coincidentally, via the Hamburg Zoological Garden, which has just been mentioned. Clu died from tuberculosis in 1942, but Maud lived to be 18, which is a good age for a big cat. She was a very impressive creature, like a large, rather dark-coloured lioness, but with the characteristic markings, the stripes, of a tiger.
The Bellevue Company had to find uses for the Speedway Stadium on the days when the aces were not riding. A series of military tattoos were tried in the early 1930s. However, the stadium was often used for political and social rallies. This short film of 1939 Cooperative Rally was made by members of the Bolton Cooperative Film Unit. The rally progresses along Ardwick Green up to Hyde Road and then on to Bellevue. On a dull and at times a windy day, the men, women and children of the cooperative movement look quite colourful in their homemade costumes, representing far-off lands and peoples. We also see the year's cooperative queen, and finally the participants link up on the grass to form words and slogans of the movement. train to Bellevue was full of Speedway fans as they made their way to the stadium. Speedway was also to run during the wartime, as clerk of the course for over 50 years, Alan Moray tells us.
We were very fortunate. When the war came, Bellevue bought the stock of Erskine bikes. So Bellevue had plenty of bikes.
What did they used to run the bikes on? I mean, presumably fuel must have been...
Wood alcohol, they were all right.
Yeah, sort of alcoholic
Dope.
mixture. Dope.
Yeah,
Of course, I mean, the crowds used to really...
terrific crowds.
Yeah, fantastic crowds, weren't they?
If you look at some of the old photographs,
yeah.
I mean, one week it'd be Eric Chitty's team versus Jack Parker, and next week North versus South. Then you'd have England versus overseas.
Yeah, yeah. And of course, parts of the fun fair were running as well, weren't they?
Oh, yeah.
They were very keen to get the Speedway sort of done and finished, so as people go around the rides afterwards, is that right?
Correct, yeah. And as the days shortened, Speedway started earlier.
Yeah.
7:15, 6:30, 6:15, 6 o'clock, and then finished till the following Easter.
Am I right in saying they used to have firework displays?
After the war.
It was after the war?
Oh, yes.
Right.
9 o'clock on the island. The storming of Quebec, the relief of Mafican. Oh, great. We had to finish at 5 to 9.
Right.
They were on the phone from the main gates at Hyde Road. If Speedway was still running when the first cannon went off at 9 o'clock, because every minute after 9 o'clock that Speedway ran was pounds lost in the pleasure beach, pleasure park.
The King's Hall, constructed in the early 19th century, was to become another world-famous venue for Bellevue. Brass band contests, dancing, circus shows, boxing and wrestling, all taking place here. The circus also ran during the war in very difficult circumstances. Lockhart stayed with the company until 1972.
Here's a Bellevue circus contract with James Chipperfield. The contract signed for and on behalf of Bellevue management by George Lockhart. And James Chipperfield is to present a group of 5 lions, 2 bulls and 1 horse, the act, a comedy riding act, and a Liberty Horse act.
The circus also ran during the war, but shortly after that it was at its peak, with a wide variety of acts as shown by this short film made by Mancunian Studios.
looking building lies one of England's most up-to-date showgrounds. One would never guess from its immediate interior that this is the showground of the North. The name is no publicity boast, it's the truth.
The immediate post-war years saw the whole complex at its peak with record attendances. Bellevue was the place to be for all the family. Bellevue's miniature railway was always a favourite with visitors to the gardens. It opened in 1928 and had 4 different locations, the first of which ran along the side of the tree-lined avenue that linked the King's Hall with the Longsight entrance. The track was extended through a tunnel and later was relocated to run past the Great Lake. In 1964, its final home was on a more circular route around the Big Cat enclosures and was known then as the Santa Fe Railway. Another feature of the gardens, which was a favourite with photographers, was the elephant ride. These dated from the introduction of elephants to Bellevue by the Jennisons in 1869. One of Bellevue's earliest elephants was Maharaja, looked after by his keeper, Lorenzo. Another keeper who came with his elephant was Phil Fernandez, a Malayan, who arrived at Bellevue in 1921. Fernandez was a familiar sight round Bellevue in his oriental garments. He was heartbroken, though, when his elephant, Lil, died in 1947. But he continued to run the rides until his own death in 1956. Elephant rides ceased at Bellevue in 1969. The zoological gardens continued to prosper in the post-war years. In 1947, a strange story was to come out of the hippo enclosure, which Lionel Marsden explains.
Hello, here's two-ton Tessie. I mean Tony. Tony is 21 today, but he can't have the key to the door as he's too valuable to the showground of the North. Tony is the largest hippo in captivity in any zoo and has been here for 18 years. The other hippo is Nicholas, his son, who was born here on December the 5th, 1938. And there's a very remarkable and true story attached to Nicholas, for on December the 5th, 1944, he murdered his mother by seizing her throat with his teeth. Fortunately, the jury returned a verdict of accidental death and not guilty, hence he's still free to have his daily bath and 4 square meals a day, off the ration. These chaps are very greedy and eat whole cabbages. Pardon yourself. Think of your indigestion.
One of the odd stories about the zoo, just after, well, almost during the war really, was the story of Nicholas, a hippo, who, it's been said he decided to murder his mother or go for a throat or something. I mean, what would cause a hippo to...
Well, this
happened,
like that,
yeah.
Oddly enough, on Nicholas's birthday, the 5th of December, 1944, and unfortunately no one was there at the time to see what happened. The bare bones of the matter are that he apparently made an unprovoked attack upon his mother, burying his very long tusks into her throat and killing her almost immediately.
Yeah.
At the time, there was a half-formed theory put out that she'd had a seizure, and in trying to rouse her, he'd injured her badly, but I don't agree with that because compassion of that sort is largely unknown among animals. It was revealed at the post-mortem, though, that her death was caused not by her admittedly horrendous injuries, but by suffocation, because a ball of hay that she was munching at the time had lodged in her throat.
Right.
For many years afterwards, her prepared skull was on exhibition in a case in the Elephant House, and ringed in red and clearly noticeable was the huge hole in the inferior maxillary bone, the lower jawbone, where one of his tusks had gone. Incidentally, a lot of us would like to know what's happened to that skull.
Right, yeah. So perhaps Nicholas wasn't quite the thug that he was made out to be,
Well,
yeah.
let's bear in mind there was no witness there, but you may have a point.
Yeah. They're quite popular animals, aren't they, the hippos? You know,
The hippopotamus
nice
is an
enclosures.
excellent zoological garden animal. People like it because it's large and impressive, and it wallows about in water. Visitors to zoological gardens love aquatic things.
And also at Bellevue, the public could get very, very close to the actual hippo enclosures, couldn't they? You could almost touch the animals.
Not only that, but there wasn't the hysteria then about the public feeding animals. And the public loved feeding the hippopotamuses. There were 3 hippopotamuses there at the time of which we're speaking. And never once did the public abuse this privilege by giving unsuitable food or being irresponsible.
Yeah.
Speedway racing was enjoying a boom period in the early 50s. Jack Parker was coming towards the end of his career. The Aces were then managed by Alice Hart, but she was to be replaced by Johnny Hoskins in 1952. Here we see the Aces in action against the Odsal Tudors, with Oliver Hart top scoring for the Yorkshire club. The dance halls were becoming very popular. One of the best known band leaders in the Northwest was Phil Moss, who explains how popular dancing had become.
Dancing was the most popular pastime, not only in Manchester but probably in all Western Europe. Before the advent of television, you see, when television came in, people could be entertained in their own front room, make a cup of tea whenever they wanted. But if boy wanted to meet girl, and that's as old as the universe itself, they had the easiest way, the most convenient way, was to go to a ballroom.
Bellevue would be ideal.
And Bellevue was, well, to call Bellevue a place would be an insult, really. It was 50 places rolled into one. And the dancing took a great part in Bellevue itself, a very great part. In the early days there was open air dancing in the afternoon. Did you know that, Ron?
Right.
Open air dancing, and dancing in the evening in the giant ballroom, the main one, known as the Elizabethan later on.
Right.
And the party streets, all the party streets were giant size compared to what we see today, like the Cumberland Street was vast in itself. But going back to the dancing at Bellevue, millions and millions of people have gone dancing. I'm not exaggerating over all the years.
I mean, there used to be sort of thousands there in the hall itself,
yes.
you know, on one
the
night.
place itself would hold, I don't know, I'm only guessing there are 4,000 or 5,000 people, the main ballroom. The Cumberland Suite would hold 2,000 to 3,000 people, in my estimation.
Phil, what sort of memories have you got of Bellevue as a musician, as a young musician? You know, was it helpful in developing your career and interest?
Oh, it was. Bellevue affected most people's lives in the north of England, and it did affect mine. My musical experiences with Bellevue, my own personal experiences, were in 3 phases. Firstly, as a player, playing with Benelli many years ago. Then, after the war, I visited Bellevue with bands like Jolos and Harry Roy. And later on, I played at Bellevue with my own band for quite a long time.
It's true to say that the north of England sort of ruled the brass band era, if you like, particularly Lancashire and Yorkshire. So who was better out of the two, do you think?
That's a matter of opinion, and of course each band seemed to take their turns in winning and losing. There was a great rivalry between Lancashire and Yorkshire bands. For instance, our local bands were Besses of the Barn. They won the title many times. The CWS had a fine band. There were lots more, but the Yorkshire brass bands were like mainly colliery bands. We had the Bellevue, King's Hall, housed the greatest brass band contests in the world. I can say the world because brass banding is our national music. The players, if you want a humorous touch, the players used to go in the local pub. What was it called now, that pub next door?
Nag's Head, I think it was.
Well, there was Caesar's Palace, wasn't there?
Yeah.
And they, before the contest, in the old days I'm speaking about, when the brass band musicians used to think that by pouring beer down their instruments, it gave a better tone, gave a lining to the instrument. And I don't agree with it personally. And they didn't, of course, miss themselves out. They took blowing is a dry occupation, a very thirsty occupation, and the boys used to regale themselves and their instruments with the beer.
It's rather significant that the very final thing or event that happened at the King's Hall in 1982 was a brass band competition. That probably wouldn't surprise you then.
Well, I would say that King's Hall provided an ideal shop window for the famous bands and the up-and-coming, the bands of tomorrow. Bellevue, I can't praise it highly enough for providing a platform for these bands to compete with each other.
In 1954, a new sport was introduced to Bellevue by Johnny Hoskins: stock car racing. The first meeting was held here on the 16th of June and proved to be very successful right up until the stadium's closure in 1987.
Despite the high reputation of Bellevue Zoo and the popularity of events such as stock car racing, the early 1950s saw the Bellevue Company in serious financial difficulties. The high attendances of the immediate post-war years had begun to drop off, and the money raised from those attendances had mainly gone in high taxation. The company was simply not in a position to be able to spend money on the improvements needed to bring Bellevue up to date. In early 1956, Eric Isles, the then chairman, made an approach to Sir Leslie Joseph, who had successfully organised the Festival Gardens in London's Battersea Park as part of the 1951 Festival of Britain. The result was a virtual takeover of the Bellevue Company by Sir Leslie Joseph and his associate Charles Forte. The final phase of Bellevue's life had begun.
Rugby league had been played by the Bellevue Rangers since before the war, but the club was disbanded in 1955 and completely folded soon after. Under the new company, there were several changes to the site. The exhibition hall was split off from the rest of Bellevue, and the miniature train was relocated to run from the ballroom to the Great Lake. During the 50s, the new company spent £15,000 on building a children's zoo, which was opened by stage star Francis Lederer. This fulfilled a long-standing idea by Gerald Isles. Feature in the zoo was a 32-foot-long concrete whale called Willie, which contained a small aquarium. In 1957, the Centenary Gardens were swept away and replaced by a new ride called the Water Chute, which was similar to a ride at the Coney Island Pleasure Park. Happily, this is one part of the old Bellevue still running, as the water chute is now part of the Blackpool Pleasure Beach. The main Hyde Road turnstiles were also rebuilt in 1957 and were positioned here where we now see the Showcase cinemas. The turnstiles were painted yellow and blue and would be the main entrance to Bellevue for the remainder of its existence. The display, called Monkeyrama, was built in the amusement park close to the scenic railway. It was designed to replace the Monkey Mountain, which had been displaced by the water chute. Sir Leslie Joseph of the company is said to have been responsible for placing it in the amusement park, in the hope that it would encourage zoo visitors to patronise the amusements. On the night of the 17th of January 1958, Bellevue suffered a serious fire when the huge wooden ballroom block was reduced to ashes. The nearby Avery and Lion House were only saved by the skillful action of the Manchester Fire Brigade. Many of the animals inside were alarmed, but the birds were all safely evacuated, and the Lion House eventually cooled down, with only Lioness Judy being a casualty. The new management spent a lot of money in the late 50s and early 60s on improvements to the zoo. One of the favourites for visitors with film cameras were the Bear Terraces, completed in July 1960, on what had been part of the old Firework Island. The new terraces were furnished with rocks and pools and were a great improvement on the old bear pit, which dated from the Jennison era. During 1963, the Great Lake was drained and filled in to allow work to start on a new bowling centre. This was to be a joint venture between the Granada Company and Bellevue. The new Bellevue Bowl was to have 32 lanes, a children's nursery and a club meeting room. 10-pin bowling mania was sweeping the country, and the centre was a great success. Cumberland and Windermere suites were also used for dancing, beer festivals and particularly catering. When combined together, the 2 suites could cater for up to 1,500 people. In 1964, they were both destroyed by fire and quickly redeveloped, with a 3rd suite, the Kendall, also added. Bellevue in the 60s was an established part of the UK entertainment circuit, with many of the famous groups playing there. One of the groups were the Dakotahs, and Mike Maxfield of the band recalls the days at Bellevue.
Much of a contribution do you think did Bellevue make in terms of concert halls and a place to play?
Oh, at that time, a very big contribution, because Manchester was full of very, very small sort of clubs. I mean, there were literally hundreds of them all over the place, all from different sizes, probably some only holding about 60, 70 people, up to about, I don't know, a couple of hundred like the Oasis. And in fact it was Rick Dixon, who was the manager of the Oasis, and he was also our agent and manager at the time. We eventually went with Brian Epstein, but at the time, in about 62, he was our manager and agent. And he had the idea of putting on what was called Rockorama. It's a larger venue. So he approached Bellevue, and I think it was a Cumberland suite that was held in. Yeah. So, you know, I can't remember how many people were there, but it must have been well over 1,000. So it was a very big venue at the time, very sort of ambitious project to do. And they had 2 stages, one at either end, so you'd get a band would come on at one end and everybody would crowd down to that end. They'd play for about 45 minutes, an hour, and then they'd have another band on at the other end. So you probably have about 5 or 6 bands on in an evening. And they were extremely popular and very, very successful.
Are there any bands or groups that you may remember from the Bellevue days that perhaps spring to mind at all? Anyone you remember looking back?
Yeah, I think all the bands did the Rockoramas, the sort of popular bands of the days, the Hollies, Wayne Fontana, the Olympics, yeah, the Emperors of Rhythm. They were the first Manchester band, actually, first rock and roll band, still going now. Freddie and the Dreamers. Gosh, I mean, there's dozens of them.
Yeah. Of course, around that time we had jazz, rock and pop all sort of mixing together, so maybe Bellevue was perhaps geared up to handling all that kind of thinking.
Well, prior to that, I think towards the middle 50s, trad jazz became very popular, and they tended to be in sort of cellar type clubs. There was one well-known one in Manchester called the Bodega, and then an offshoot of jazz became Lonnie Donegan, who started skiffle groups. In fact, he probably had one of the biggest influences in this country on people playing guitar, more than anybody really. And then rock and roll sort of evolved as well at the same, was evolving in America and came over here, and it just became very, very popular very quickly. And it sort of, that's why there were so many small clubs around Manchester area and the Stockport area, and then it was obviously so popular that they needed somewhere bigger, so this is why they tried at Bellevue, Rockorama.
Aces team on the Speedway track were having a lean time as far as winning honours were concerned. The riders of the day then were Peter Craven, Ron Johnson, Jim Jacobi, Dick Fisher. Here the Aces are in action against Wimbledon. The 1963 season highlights were often the Golden Helmet match races between Peter Craven and Ove Fundin. They were great rivals, Fundin winning on this occasion. Craven went on to become the twice world champion, but tragically lost his life in a track accident at Edinburgh. The Aces team went on to win the championship that year. Maybe they won it for him. The coldest winter on record brought a chilly end to the year. As we continue our look at Bellevue's history, let us hear some of your memories.
At bonfire night, the display they used to do. And I used to like the ballrooms.
The ballroom dancing?
Yes, used to enjoy that very much with the family.
Monday night used to be dancing night in the Elizabethan ballroom, and then later on in the evening a little bit more dancing around the bushes outside. I mean, that was very special.
Well, it was just a family day out, wasn't it, with all the family. You could come with your children and have a good day out. It was like the poor man's Blackpool. You couldn't afford to go to Blackpool, you could always afford to go to Bellevue. The Bobs, popcorn, see lions and tigers. It was brilliant, it was magic.
I remember the Tygon, which was a half tiger, half lion that they had. I remember the school going to visit that, and it peed over us, which I thought was rather wonderful at the time. I also remember Miss Gray being really embarrassed because we got in the monkey cage. She was the headmistress, she was always Miss Gray. And two of the monkeys were doing what comes naturally, and that was, we thought it was wonderful, but the teachers hustled us out before we could see anything. The Bobs were another great feature of Bellevue, but my favourites of Bellevue were the Ghost Train and Shoot the Rapids. Shoot the Rapids, you sat in like a box and the seat collapsed, and you went down like a slope. Well, actually it was like a blanket with bumps underneath it. But I thought at the time that it was really exciting, do you know what I mean? That was the most incredible experience.
The old Bobs, they were the best in the world, I thought, the old man Bobs. Speedway, wrestling, all the ballrooms, everything you wanted to do was at Bellevue. The best time there was.
The Caterpillar.
Tell us why you love the Caterpillar.
Oh, because every now and again, the old thing comes over, it goes all dark, and then you get a whoosh up the legs.
Hang on, excuse me. We're going to find out what she meant by a whoosh up the legs. Excuse me, what did you mean by a whoosh up the legs?
Well, there's a part on the ride where you get a gush of air, and it sort of goes right
Hang on. And when that thing came over and it went all dark, did you kiss?
Yeah, now and again. Now and again. But I'm not supposed to say that because my mum's here.
Oh, you can.
Only little, really. I was only 13.
We had to learn somewhere.
Well, that's true. What a better place.
I mean, she's still learning.
The Bobs.
Tell us why.
The excitement. The excitement. Yeah.
I remember the King's Hall. We all used to go to the King's Hall with school and, you know, do a big concert and that.
And what did you do? What did you see at the King's Hall?
Well, all the schools used to go and we used to do a concert and all the schools used to sing along, and there was a circus as well. We went to the circus now and again. Come
on, what was your favourite ride or your favourite?
I like the water shoot, but I also like the boating like where we are now.
You were telling me that before we got to recording on camera.
The boating like now.
You mean we're stood right where the lake of water used to be?
Go around on the boats and fish. And we drive past and I'll tell my little girl there's a boating like there. Because she used to come here.
Tell you what, if there was me and you'd be drowned now.
I know, yeah. I would be.
Do you miss it in a way?
Yeah, they should never have closed it down. The zoo and all, I mean, it was fantastic. I used to bring these to the zoo and take them home and then come back at the night time.
So I started going to Speedway. Was it The Aces, wasn't it?
That's right, the Aces.
And
were there any riders you remember, perhaps?
Oh, Peter Craven.
Peter Craven.
Nigel Bocock. I think he was sort of somebody else, wasn't he?
Yes, Coventry.
Coventry, that's right. I remember Peter Craven particularly well because he ran over my foot with his sports car. But I joined the Aces, and you used to have this little badge, didn't you? This Aces badge, and then if you stayed in each year, you got a little bar. There's these geezers with all these like long, about 7 or 8, 9, 10 bars with all the different years on. I used to go there a lot.
Bellevue, we used to always go there as well for Christmas. James Farmer Norton, my dad worked for a firm called Sir James Farmer Norton in Salford, and they used to take us to the circus once a year as part of the kids' day out for the kids of the employees, and it was the only time in the whole year that I could have 2 chalk ices. My dad used to give me a shilling, and he said 2 Walls chalk ices and make myself slightly sick. Brilliant.
It had everything. It's like your local Blackpool, except for no tower, but it had everything else that you. Fun for the kids, fun for the adults.
Yeah, well, in my day, you could send your kids to Bellevue, and you knew they were safe. It was marvellous because it was an excitement, and everybody loved it, from the young to the old, and your kids were safe in Bellevue, and this is where we'd be all day long, you know, on a Saturday, right till night time when they had the firework display at the end of the night, and it's brilliant.
There was a dancing, and I mean, they used to have beautiful dresses on, great bands, and it really was good, old time. And where I lived, they used to organise a coach and bring the people up here for the dance in the evening, and it was only a shilling.
What was it, the big roller coaster?
The Volta roller coaster.
Yeah, so I used to go on the Scenic Railway. I could just about manage that. I used to love that, the Scenic Railway. And the Caterpillar, remember the Caterpillar? It used to go up and down, didn't it? And it used to cover over, didn't it?
The family day out was the main thing in Bellevue, where everyone of all ages could go along. You didn't have to have a lot of money. You had a grand day out at Bellevue.
Meeting personalities. It was magic. Other times you used to have to wait for autographs if you wanted to meet the stars, but because you was in the box office you could meet them for nothing. They used to come to you. I think that was the magic.
Another magician on the horizon in 1967 was art student Vance Tutton, who was to attempt the world roller coaster record on the famous Bellevue Bobs. This attracted worldwide publicity for himself and the Bellevue Company. Tutton faced a massive task, but was a very determined young man, and remembers the story as if it was yesterday.
Manchester in 1965 as an art student. There were students in the college from Manchester itself who were very enthusiastic about the Bob's roller coaster. They were always going on about this terrifying ride, and they eventually persuaded me to go and have a ride on it. When I did ride on it, I didn't think it was as terrifying as they'd said, and when it was pointed out to me at that time that the world record for roller coaster rides was only 303, I thought, well, I think I can break that and I can do it on this roller coaster, which seemed appropriate because at that time that roller coaster was the fastest roller coaster in the world. They were claiming a speed of 61 miles an hour on the first drop. So I wrote to Bellevue, pointed out that their roller coaster was in the Guinness Book of Records as the fastest roller coaster in the world. Drew their attention to the fact that the world record was only 303 consecutive rides. Told them that I thought I could break that record and I would like to do it on their roller coaster. They wrote back to me, asked me to go up to see them. I had a meeting with the management team and it was set up from there. They took the view that I wanted to break a world record, they wanted maximum publicity from it. So in order to achieve that, we had to work out how long it was going to take us to break the world record, which we figured would be about 12 hours. They then wanted it to finish too late for the evening newspapers, but in good time for maximum coverage in the national dailies. So we were looking at a finish time of about 4 o'clock in the afternoon, which meant that we had to start at 4 o'clock in the morning. Then they got a volunteer crew to come and man it at that time, and we set off in the dark.
The Bob's roller coaster ride itself, the way it was all constructed and everything, the way it ran, I mean, it seemed to be a lot different than a lot of your modern day roller coasters. So what were its sort of characteristics, if you like? What do you remember of it?
Well, the drops were bigger and the banking on the bends was steeper. One of the bends had banking on it that was 60 degrees. And at that time, most roller coasters had seat units of 6, 3 double ones, but formed one unit. But on the Bobs, each double seat was pivoted to get itself round these sharp bends and steep bankings. That was the main difference with it.
When you came across that idea of breaking the world record, did you have the full support of your family, your parents? What was their sort of reaction when you came home from your day at college and then decided you're going on this roller coaster for 12 hours?
Well, everyone thought I'd gone completely mad.
Sure.
But eventually they all came round to supporting me and in fact turned up on the day. Only my mother declined to have a ride with me on the day.
What kind of I mean, did you have to do any special training to go on a thing like this? I mean, it must have taken it out of you a little bit to go. What were your sort of state were you in when you finished the ride?
When I finished, I felt as if I'd been hit in the middle of the back with a sledgehammer. I'd sat in the back seat all the way. That's my personal preference for riding roller coasters. When you do that, you're pulled over the top of the dips, and every time the seat gives you a smack in the back, and you slump forward in the seat, you know, and yeah, I felt like I've been thumped and shoved around quite a bit.
And how do you go on for food and drink and, you know, calls of nature, things like that?
Well, each time the cars came round to the station, we didn't stop, but they had to slow it up each time to go through the station. And in fact, we put such a polish on the brakes that by the end of the day they were having to throw sand on the tracks to slow it down. And food was passed to me as I went by. You know, I remember eating chicken legs and things like that. And I also played a game of chess with one of my friends from college. We were passing a pocket chess set to and fro as the train passed through the station. I had time to think about my moves as we were climbing up to the top of the first dip, and then I'd make my move and pass the chess set over next time we came round. And I won the game of chess.
Yeah. It attracted a lot of national publicity and TV coverage. How do you sort of cope with all that? That must have been a bit sort of unusual for you, really, to have all the press round you and so on. But did you enjoy all that at the time?
Yeah, I loved every minute of it. It was more than I'd expected. I was absolutely amazed at the publicity it attracted. CBS television and the Voice of America radio. You know, everybody was there.
For a few moments, Vance Tutton had conquered the world. Work was to start on Miniland in early 1960s and opened in 1966. This was to be one of the last works of Bellevue's last scenic artist, Sid Lane. The Miniland contained over 600 individual hand-painted figures. Further changes to the site saw the removal of the hippo enclosure, which had been built in 1906. This was to be replaced by the new tropical river house. Eartha Kitt was there for the opening ceremony. Bellevue Aces were reaching their peak in their history, with championship wins in 3 consecutive years around the late 60s. The old Hyde Road track was always a favourite with many Speedway fans and riders from all over the country. The former 1976 world champion, Peter Collins, tells us his story.
The track was so wide that you could go anywhere on the track that you wanted to. I mean, I know a lot of times I never really put that much importance on making a good start because I knew that I could always pass riders from behind, and if a rider had made the start on me, I could, you know, follow him down the back straight, and as we went into the pits corner, if he was going to the inside, I could just immediately do a run round the outside, or if he was going to go wide, I could go to the inside. If he went round the middle, I could go either way, and that was the big advantage about it, because with it being purpose-built, it was very wide, the shape was perfect, where I suppose a lot of the existing tracks, even in use today, are in stadiums that are not purpose-built tracks. The track's actually perhaps in a confined space, whether it's between a dog track or around a football pitch and so on. And that was the great advantage about Bellevue. It was perfect, purpose-built, and it was a perfect track.
Of course, one of the peculiar things about the whole stadium is that often during the day it was open and people could just come in and have a walk around or even do a few practice laps.
Well, I used to do that, you know, if ever I'd got a bike that wanted testing, if I was having, say, bike problems or a new engine, I could just ring up the management there at Bellevue and just ask if I could go down and have a ride. And I could go down there on a Monday morning, Wednesday dinner time, any time I wanted really during the week. And as long as the weather was fine, and I could just go out on the track and ride around as much as I wanted really, which was absolutely great, because unfortunately these days most of the riders haven't really got that facility, because a lot of the tracks have got to run between quite strict sort of time limits and so on, where they could perhaps only run speedway on race nights really because of the environmental people and the noise and so on.
Looking at the Aces history around that time, of course, around the late 60s and 70s, the team probably had the most successful era in the club's history, winning everything. I mean, what do you remember about that particular part of the club's history?
Well, it was really down to the work which the team manager at the time, Dent Oliver, had put in during the years of his training at Bellevue with the young riders and so on that he'd brought through from the Bellevue Training School. And the introduction of the second division in 1968, when Bellevue won the league that first year before they moved to Rochdale. And so many good riders came through, and everybody really wanted to go and ride at Bellevue. And it also sort of coincided with the time that Ivan Major arrived at Bellevue, who was the current world champion at that time. So we had a fantastic atmosphere when I started there in 1971. I think Bellevue won the league in 69, in 70 and 71. So my first year at Bellevue we won the league, and I think we won the cup as well, which was great. I mean, what a place to start your career, you know, getting a cup and a league double in my very first year of racing.
Who were some of the riders and teammates you perhaps better remember, team managers, you know, who were the people that, you know, got the trophies, I think?
Well, of course, when I started there, I mean, Ivan Major was the main man. He was really an inspiration to everybody, and Dent Oliver was the team manager, and he originally signed me at Bellevue in 1971. But I mean, some of my idols were still going, who sort of influenced me quite a bit. Chris Pusey was the current, well, he was the captain, I think, after Ivan Major left and went to Exeter, and Alan Wilkinson, of course Chris Morton started just after me, but during the early 70s, unfortunately after Ivan left, we didn't quite have the same results that we'd had during the very early 70s. But I had my best years then, probably up to about 77, 78 when I was at my peak. So I really did see Bellevue at its best through my career.
Well, let's have a look at some of your passing skills. It's a race against Ivan Major. Perhaps you can just talk us through it.
Well, this race was typical of what I was saying earlier on, really, with regard to me not always making the best of starts. I mean, as you can see there, Ivan Major off gate 1 makes a great start, and I'm sort of left, fortunately, just about managing to stay in second place. But once I'm clear of the other two, then I can really have a good go at Ivan, and there he goes into the pits corner, which was a good corner for me normally, and I sort of try and run around the outside of him. But Ivan's aware that I'm there all the time.
Did you have a particular favourite part of the track that you used to like, perhaps overtaking, generally speaking?
I usually could overtake on most parts of the track, but you know, it varied. I mean, the pits corner was quite good for me, but I really enjoyed it anywhere. Any parts of the track were good. It was such a good track. But if you watch this corner now, this is the pits corner. Ivan's expecting me round the outside, and then I change direction and then come up the inside of him, and it's too late for Ivan. By the time we get to the other end, I'm sort of in there and sail past him. So I really used to love sort of riding there at Bellevue, and to pass Ivan like that was great, because he was sort of multi-world champion and probably still the Bellevue track record holder at that stage, and for me that was, you know, one of the best times in my speedway, I suppose, meeting somebody of his calibre like that.
Ever since the end of the First World War, Bellevue had been a venue for exhibitions with a variety of shows, mainly held in the Central Hall. It was considered the best venue outside London. The facilities continued to be used until the opening of the GMEX Centre in 1986. Most of the events in later years tended to be low-key events, such as custom car shows.
I love it first thing in the morning because, particularly on a day like today, the weather's good, the keepers are coming in and they're saying hello to their animals, and the animals are reacting to the keepers because they do, and doors are being opened, and they're sort of yawning and stretching themselves. It's a very happy time in a zoo. Yeah, as the place gets underway again, it's rather like a great machine starting up. Oh, lovely. Who's a good boy. Blanco was born here, like all the baby animals you've seen and will see today. He's, what, 2.5 now. He's at the teenager stage, so he does get a bit boisterous. But he's a very friendly lion. Have a lick then. Oh, I see my hair tastes nice. Yes, I will. Can't help the root today, I'm sorry. Oh, that's good boy. Come on, let's go do it to me. That's good. Hey, that's good. You're a good boy. Yes, a good boy. He was born here by dog 2.5 years ago, and he got used to jumping up into our arms. Well, he weighs nearly 200 pounds now, so he's a bit heavy. So you can't get right up, can you, Frank? But no, don't you give it to us now. Come on. Hey. No, he's a friend. Come on, Blanco. No, come on, you can play with him later. Today, he's boisterous. You know, I mean, you saw what he was doing. Not a mark on me. Well, little scratches. A domestic cat would do more than that. In other words, that lion is not trying anything on, he's just being himself. But they do occasionally test you out, and even worse than that, something could go wrong. I could slip and fall and tread on him in a painful place, and he'd hit me, because he's a lion, because I've hurt him, and I'm his friend, and I shouldn't have hurt him. And you've got to guard against that sort of thing. So what you do, you have less contact. I'm already stopping him coming up on my shoulders quite so much, because it won't be a good scene. He's about 200 pounds now, and I could just manage. But when he gets to 400 pounds, I'm dead. It's good enough to eat, Chris, isn't it? Joe. Joe, you're lazy. What's wrong with you? It's a very hot day and he's feeling a bit idle. Would you let me get away with it, Topaz? I bet you wouldn't. But he's not quite full grown. He's adult now. He's a silverback. As you can see, he's just getting his silverback. He's got a lovely crown on his head. And he has started mating with Susie. He's about 12 years of age now. To say they're as strong as 10 men is putting it mildly. They're probably as strong as 20 men in terms of sheer strength. I wouldn't like to have a tug of war with him if I had 19 men to help me. Immensely powerful. one of the problems of containing them in a situation like this is you've got to have the building strong enough to hold them. Which means that it does look in parts like a prison, it's bound to. I see Susie's very interested in those leaves, and I'm hoping, Jojo knows this, I'm hoping that her interest and enthusiasm will overcome her fear. She might come a bit closer and take them in a moment. Oh. Now, what if she wants some of her own? Susie, stay, take it. Don't fall off with it. They're fabulous creatures, Gorilla. I would very much like to have a big group here. I think people come to zoos because A, they want to be entertained, and B, they want to have what they've seen on television made real to them. And this is one of our snags, of course, because it doesn't happen that way. You come to a zoo and you've maybe 2 minutes to look at a particular animal, and in that 2 minutes the animal can be asleep. It can be defecating, and I'm being polite. It can be throwing things, or it may not even be there. And something happened actually 3 or 4 weeks ago. I've waited 10 years to see this. Alligators mating, big ones. These American Mississippi alligators, superb things, about 10 feet long, in our aquarium. And when they're mating, the bulls not only make a great roaring noise, but they spout water. They squirt water from their backs, the toe of their backs and their flanks. I've heard about this, I've never seen it. And I was in the aquarium recently, and for 20 seconds, and it's taken 10 years for me to see this, 20 seconds the alligators went through this incredible routine. And I was delighted, you know, and I was saying to the bloke, I said, how marvellous, I waited 10 years to see this. And at that second, the alligators stopped, and became comatose again, and a school party came in. And as the kids walked by, they were saying, hey, they're plastic. They're not real, they're not living. I thought, bugger me, you should have been here 2 minutes ago, they were living then. People have preconceived ideas about how zoos should be. For instance, zoos must never show an animal which is not absolutely fit. Now in the children's zoo we've got Cocky. Superb bird, Cocky, out in the children's zoo all year round, climbed up the raccoon cage a couple of years ago, lost most of a foot. People sometimes spot that and complain that we've got a damaged bird in the children's zoo and how can we do such a terrible thing? You know, let's face it, that's nonsense. That, if you want to talk about contentment, that bird has a pretty good life. In Moti, in the old days, used to give elephant rides, and well, thank God before I came, she went for a trip into one of the cafes one day. The manageress used to give her a bun every day. One day the manageress wasn't there, so Ellie went looking for the bun, and she went straight into the cafe, and she took the doors and the transom and half the wall with her. You know, after all, she wanted a bun. She's a sweet little creature, and she's pretty good-natured, but she isn't handled at all, as a rule. Although she'd come to the bars and be petted, she isn't, in that sense, tame, in any sense, tame. And if you grabbed her, any of us had grabbed her, say, around the neck, without doing what Mike did and used her coat, she'd have bitten. She still could. If I wasn't holding in a full Nelson, she'd have me now. She'd try and run away, and then when she couldn't go, she'd bite. And she got a super set of teeth, hadn't you? Come on. See? Look now, just look with her legs are gripping around. These monkeys are much stronger than you realise. Oh gosh, I'm glad she didn't get out though. It's a nice way of life, most of the time. It's horrible when things go wrong, and it's superb when things go right. But you get continuity in the zoo. It's rather like the same way the farmer does, or a forester. A forester plants a tree. A farmer produces animals, you know, has animals produced by other animals, and you see a thing through from beginning to end. Something most of us don't, you know, we're not able to do these days. If you're very good, I'll give you a photographer tonight.
The zoo world was shocked when in 1977 Bellevue Zoo was to close due to financial losses. Peter Grayson was to be the last zookeeper. It was a sad day for Bellevue. Despite the zoo closure, the rest of the site continued to operate with the circus, stadium events and the fun fair. The amusement park was in decline, although new rides were still being introduced, the Jetstream ride being one of them.
Was really a ride built for a milder or warmer or sunnier climate than Manchester, and it used to give us lots of aggravation because if it rained it went too fast, and if it was dry it didn't go fast enough, and there were also teething troubles in getting staff to be able to accommodate and take on, as it were, new technology at the time, and we used to have little incidences where they raced through the platform and sent them back on the second trip at no extra cost, you know.
People got a lap and a half.
Did indeed, yeah. There was a very funny incident one time where we had a Russian visitor come to Bellevue, and of course we like to pride ourselves on showing off our attractions, so we gave him a ride on the Jetstream. And it was quite windy, if I remember right. It was on a Sunday afternoon, so his hat came away and got jammed in the mechanism, so poor Ivan, as it were, and the rest of his Russian party was stranded up, looking over the Manchester landscape. You know, that was quite funny.
How did they get down then?
Well, we had to get the fire brigade in, believe it not. You know, of course we was able to prove that. You know, that Manchester boasted of a good fire service or rescue service.
Were they tempted to go on the ride again after that, or did they?
Indeed, yeah. In fact, they felt they'd really got value for money. Yes, yeah.
The Christmas circus was still held in the King's Hall, although George Lockhart had retired in 1972. The new ringmaster was Norman Barrett, who stayed there until its final show in 1981.
Now, we've looked at some clips of film of when George Lockhart was the ringmaster,
yes.
And of course you took over of him. So what was your impression of George? It was a long time, wasn't it?
Well, a marvellous record. Well, actually, the first time in 1976 he was there, I used to just love it at the start of the show when the house lights used to dim and the spotlights used to go on, and George all the ring boys used to walk in, stand either side of the entrance, and Uncle George, as we all knew him, used to come with this big cigar and just stand there and salute to the audience, and they used to erupt because the audiences loved George Lockhart at Bellevue.
Yeah, so that must have been quite a difficult act to follow, to put your own style into it. You know.
Of course, yes. I mean, anybody who's got a big name, it's hard to follow because, like, you're the young pretender that comes along. But we all have our own style of doing this thing. I mean, a ringmaster's job has changed over the years. I mean, now you're more the host, the compere, the stage manager. You have to do a little bit, individual bits in the show to keep the show going along.
Why do you think that the Bellevue Circus was, like, you know, world famous, and it was so special to everybody? What was sort of different?
Well, Bellevue, I mean, is going for many years, of course, but it was
a very, very special winter circus where acts from all over the world used to meet. It had a wonderful, wonderful atmosphere. I mean, it was a tragedy it ever had to be closed, but I mean, that's a different story, and you know more about that than I do. But it was a magnet to people. Everybody wanted to come to Bellevue for the Christmas season. It was a nice, friendly circus. The conditions were good. You had your caravan right outside the back of the circus. So you all had a kind of a very relaxed, not easy time, because nothing, when you're entertaining, you're working hard. But it was a very relaxed time, and run by, at that time, very nice and correct management.
Yeah. Of course, you brought out a book recently, and you've had various references to Bellevue in it. I seem to remember you've written a letter or a poem or something on the final day.
Well, the final day at Bellevue, I mean, it's the saddest day that I've experienced in any circus, because I'll just find out what I actually wrote about the last night. Well, there's I don't know if you can see that. That's a picture of Jacko Fawcett, George Lockhart, and myself. That was taken at Bellevue, and that is a picture. I don't know, you might be able to see it. Yes, that's Jacko Fawcett and myself again on the last night of Bellevue. And this is what I actually wrote, and I was thinking about what was going to happen on the last night at Bellevue. And I said, that's in the end of an era. In this ring, over the last 53 years, the world's greatest circus acts have appeared. And as the lights go out at Bellevue, it's the closing of a famous building, but not the death of a circus. As long as there are children and people who like good family entertainment, the circus will always be there. And when I was doing this, I'd arranged for the lady who was on the lights, and I was doing this, and the lights started to go off. And as every light went off, the drummer went tick, tick, on the drums, and so all the lights were going off, and it was getting darker and darker. And in the end, only Jacko Fawcett and I were left in a spotlight, and I said, thank you very much for being here tonight. Thank you for being such a wonderful audience, and thank you for being such an appreciative audience in something I love so much, the circus. Good night. And I normally say good night, God bless, but that night I was so choked, I got good night out, turned, and we walked out in a spotlight, and the spotlight got smaller and smaller and smaller until we disappeared. And the whole of Bellevue erupted, and a Daily Express photographer came in and said, right, will you go back and do a photograph? I said, no, that was for real. I shall never ever go back in that ring again. And I never did. And they bulldozed the place down, as you know. But that was for real. And I mean, even now I've gone quite, the hairs are standing on my neck. But when you were there, and the guy that actually wrote my book, he was a journalist, and he wrote it all down and described. And the next day we'd gone to Brussels to work, and he started to cry when he listened to it, when he read it out again, because it was such an emotional part.
Very much the final curtain.
Oh yes, oh yes.
Well, let's now just have a look at some of the acts that were going on around your time. Perhaps you can just take us through it.
Yeah, well, we'll have a look, yes. All right. Yeah. That's it. Look, my word, I was young then, wasn't I? I must have been. I was a good-looking fella then. Here we are. This is actually one of the most exciting opening acts we ever had at Bellevue. That's the Michaela Kay's Cossack Riders.
Right.
Her parents actually used to have a very big Russian Cossack riding act. Right. And she's with her husband. Sure. This guy's from East Germany, and you'll see him a little bit later on. He does a high wire act as well. We had a lot of fun with him.
I mean, they're very skilled, sort of, well, very fit people, aren't they, to be able to...
Well, all circus people are very talented people. I mean, you see them kind of doing acts like this, but you see, outside the ring, they're probably, they're kind of carpenters and electricians and mechanics. They're self-supporting people. You know, we all work extremely hard. I mean, that's terribly difficult to do, an awful lot of strain.
Daddy's had a bit of humour to it as well, you know.
That's right, he's trying to get his hat down, which is shot up on the pole. That's Jacko Fawcett and Little Billy, great pals of mine. Jacko is, in fact, my son's godparent.
Right.
Godparents, yes. Jack now lives in Skegness and he's retired. The little guy is Paul.
Right.
Another, Lee Marsh. And her poodles. I just saw Lee the other day.
Right.
And she's a young lady that's talented. Not only can she do a performing dog, she used to be able to work on the trapeze. It takes a long time training dogs like that. You need a lot of patience, a lot of repetition.
Do you think like the dogs enjoy doing all this? I suppose.
Yeah, I mean, if they wouldn't do it so easily. I mean, you can't say to a dog, "Look happy" for 5 minutes while you're in the ring. You know, it's got to be looked after in the right environment. It's got to have. I think that little dog's name was Tiddles, I think.
Yeah.
This is Romano, Mexican cloud swinger.
Because there's no safety net underneath.
No.
Is there? You know.
Well, this is part of the risks of our business. The only one problem with Bellevue, it wasn't really high enough to be able to have high wire acts and flying trapeze acts.
Yeah. I mean, this chap's making it look easy, but it is.
Well, listen, you can fall off that thing and have a bad accident. Yeah. But he was a very good comedy guy.
A bit like bungee jumping, isn't it?
You see, our business is, I mean, he was a good salesman. He was able to sell his product. See, in the circus, you get a lot of good acts that can't sell it. I mean, back to Jekyll Billy again. This is the strength gag.
Right.
Jack's trying to show Billy how to develop his muscles. It's a strength board.
Jack is very popular.
Oh, little Billy, he's a great Arsenal supporter.
Right.
All his life.
So here we have another, you know, I mean, this looks quite a dangerous act as well.
Well, it looks quite dangerous, although it is under control, but I mean, it's, well, here's Jacko with the fire hose going to put it out. The guy's supposed to be, doesn't even know it's on fire.
Right.
I mean, you've got to know all these things. I mean, they don't just happen by accident. They're all thought of. Now, this is Bobby Roberts and his elephant. Now, Bobby and I used to do a juggling act many, many years ago. Because I used to work for their fathers. It was, in fact, his mother that first put me in a red coat.
Right.
This is Bobby's cousin John Roberts.
Of the animal acts, which were the sort of the more popular? Did people enjoy this more than the elephants, or were they all, you know, equal?
No, they're just like the animals. You see, circus is about animals. I mean, everybody thinks that people want to go to circuses without animals. They don't actually work without the animals. I mean, I'm all for the animals being looked after properly, being cared for, and treated with respect. That's perfectly right. They should be.
Here's one of the.
That's the high wire act. That, in fact, that gentleman is the guy you saw earlier on doing the bus stop act, going up the pole backwards. They're all very talented people. I think Victor Ponche and Sylvia.
Plenty of variety, of course, in the acts, aren't there? All different.
Well, that's the reason why a circus is a circus. There's something for everybody. You know, he had the most gorgeous wife. We always used to say everybody used to watch his wife and not watch him.
Yes, I imagine that's possible. Yeah.
A friend of mine said, "What a Barbara Morris and her sea lions." This lady has now retired, lives in Jacksonville in America.
Right.
You see, these things have to be. That's a very hard act to own as a sea lion. You're forever cutting fish, changing the water. I mean, it's a 24-hour-a-day job looking after sea lions.
Yeah.
Little Bill.
Yeah.
These acts, I forget the name, but they came from East Germany, well, Germany now, of course. And there were about 8 young people altogether. You see, all these acts, I mean, they look reasonably simple, but they take a lot of rehearsing.
Sure.
And you can still fall off one of those and have a bad accident.
Yeah. Right, Norman, we've touched there on about how difficult is it to train animals. Now, you brought one along for us today, so...
Well, with these, you see, I get the budgies, I buy them when they're about 6 months old. They're all male birds. And it's just about getting them finger tamed, you see. I mean, when I first get a budgie, I kind of get him used to sitting on my finger, get used to handling, and then when he's very quiet, then I start to introduce him to the tricks in the act. But I mean, you've got to imagine their brain is only very small, so you can't give them too much to learn at once. And it takes about 8 to 9 months before they actually work in the act and they're working properly. And I mean, when I'm doing the hand taming, I mean, I get hold of them, and to get them on my hand, I literally just play around with them and get him standing on there, and then kind of just fondle him around. I mean, he's very tame as this little guy. I mean, but I mean, it just takes quite a while. But like, I mean, I'm handling them very, very gently now all the time. And I mean, come on, son, there's a good boy. Come up here. There's a good boy. This is Peppy. Say hello. Hello. Okay. Can you speak a bit louder? Speak a bit. Say hello. Hello. There's a good boy. See, he's pretty.
The stadium had been sold to Stuart Bamforth, who owned the site for 5 years. The last motorsport event held here was a stock car meeting in November 1987. The developers were closing in on Bellevue.
So now finally we come to the Bellevue of more modern times, and as we see, it's an ever-changing landscape. There's no doubt that the 1990s is a period where we're all making nostalgic films of one kind or another, and today's programme has been no exception. The mind boggles though as the sort of nostalgic films we'll all be making at the end of the next century. As people's leisure time has changed, we're spending more of that now in out-of-town shopping precincts or queuing up on 12-lane motorways, as the British countryside is rapidly filling up with concrete. The Bellevue site has in recent times been remodernised quite extensively, and to some degree quite successfully. Where the old zoo was, of course, has now been replaced with the ADT car auction site. Now, ADT are great for the local economy, but they do very little for British heritage. There's no doubt that Bellevue in its heyday was possibly Europe's first major theme park, and arguably the world's first park as well. And the City of Manchester can be justly proud of that. We hope that you've enjoyed the memories of Bellevue, and maybe we can share some more with you in the future. There are two publications that you might be interested in. Looking Back at Belle Vue, in the red cover, is available from Willow Publishing, 36 Moss Lane, Timperley in Cheshire. The Belle Vue Story, in the yellow cover, is available from Neil Richardson, 88 Ringley Road, Stoneclough, Ratcliffe, Manchester. And Neil also has a number of other local history booklets. Why not give him a ring on 01204 578 138.